You rolling?
We're rolling.
You ready?
Yeah.
I'm Harry,
I'm Zoe.
and let's ramble about theme parks on
Coasterbot Rambles. We're here again for another go.
round 2.
We're going to try and make it better this time. Improve on the second podcast. Are you proud that I didn't call it a pod?
Yep, because no one knows what pod is.
So for everybody who doesn't know what a pod is a podcast.
Everyone doesn't know what a pod is. No.
I thought that was fairly obvious.
It is, but it's just weird.
It's just another thing that Harry can moan about.
It's very true.
I'm going to call it pod, Harry's going to call it podcast, and then hopefully at least some of you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So the general feedback from the first episode seemed pretty good. People were, I guess, quite happy that there was a podcast. Many of you said that you want the podcast to be on iTunes, and we're working on that, and it will be on iTunes at some point.
It's not in our power.
Not yet.
It's out of our control. No,
Yeah.
They're sorting it out, so hopefully it'll be on there soon, and then everyone can listen on the go.
Yeah, and it'd be a much more podcasty
Podcast.
thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I get where they're coming from, because I listen on Spotify, but I don't think we'll be getting on there because they're very selective.
Yeah, well, Spotify,
But
it doesn't matter really, as long as...
It'll be definitely on iTunes at some point. So hopefully once we're on iTunes, it'll be much easier to just listen wherever you want to go. Mm-hmm. But for now, we're using SoundCloud as our main.
Yeah, or you could just watch on YouTube and have it in the background.
Yeah.
Some suggestions or some dislikes of the podcast was always overuse of the little jingle towards the end.
What can I say? I love jingles.
Yeah.
No, I see where they're coming from. I'll try and be more selective. But it'll get better over time anyway.
Yeah,
just as we learn how to do things.
Please do keep sending your feedback, just because that's the only way that we can improve, really.
Yeah. And we want to make it something that, obviously, the people who are going to be listening to it, we want to make it something that you guys will like anyway, so we're just aiming it at you, so let us know what you want.
Phoenix opens very soon. This podcast was recorded way in advance on the 25th of June, but Phoenix opens on the 7th of July to the public, which is the Netherlands' first wing coaster and Europe's 4th B&M wing coaster. So
nice little stats there.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. Located at Toverland, quite a small theme park in the Netherlands, which is growing quite rapidly, really. And with the addition of Phoenix, and there's another boat ride that goes with it, it should be quite a nice area. I know that Toverland are bumping up ticket prices, and which is fair enough because that's such a big investment for them to make with such a small park. But as wing coasters go, it doesn't seem to look the best wing coaster. I mean, if you just talk about the 4 in Europe, I don't think it's kind of close to the others in layout wise. I think it's probably got one of the weakest layouts out there, but maybe the theming and the whole area will help boost it up.
What is the theme?
Kind of like this magical...
Oh, so it is meant to be a theme of a phoenix?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's like a bird crossed with something else?
Yeah, a fiery bird.
Yeah.
But the boat ride's like this other magical thing, like
Okay.
wizard, I think.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool, and they've got some nice rock work going on and all that kind of stuff.
Love a bit of rock work, you do.
The layout is weird because it's got a lift hill, and you know on dive coasters where it usually has like a turn at the top?
Yeah.
It's got a turn. So it goes up a lift hill, has a turn, then does the half rollover, and then the wing over drop.
Yeah.
So it's quite a weird layout.
So it's quite a long wait for the drop.
Yeah. But it makes it funny because the Netherlands had the first B&M dive coaster without a turn and the first B&M wing coaster with a turn. So, because Baron doesn't have a turn on the drop, and that's the only dive coaster that doesn't.
Yeah.
And then Phoenix is the only wing coaster that does have a turn.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty weird. The Dutch people are crazy, eh? Yeah. Other news, as of right now, we're halfway through the trip with the American dudes. So that's Coaster Studios, Logan from Coaster Kids, and Chad from Ohio Valley Coasters. In 1 day time, Taylor from Coast Studios and Logan from Coaster Kids, they'll be at Thorpe Park, and then the day after they'll be at Alton Towers, day after Alton Towers again, and then finally Blackpool on the last day. So I just went to Wallaby Holland, Heidi Park and Hansa Park with them, had a great time there, and there'll be content going up on the channel all about that, vlogs and all that kind of stuff. And at some point we'll also talk about it on the podcast as well, in a more of a dedicated episode, once the whole thing has happened. And we will get guests on the podcast. That's something that came up. People are like, are you going to have guests on? And we definitely will.
Let us know who you want to come on, who you want to hear from.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We'll try and make it happen.
Yeah, I'm sure that we'll have like Coast Studios and maybe the other guys from the trip on without a hassle. But
yeah, we're hoping to dedicate a whole pod to each person, so it'll be quite an in-depth discussion / interview type thing. So when we do get them on, you'll be able to, obviously we'll tweet out and you can ask questions and we can try and answer all of them they can try and answer all of them for you. So it should be quite good. It's not going to be like brief. We're going to try and do it in quite an in-depth way.
Other theme park news, there isn't really any. It's a bit of a slow time. Most things that have been, most things that have been built for the 2018 season have already opened, but that's not true of Hyperion or Valkyria. They're yet to open, so we'll talk about those when they actually have opened, and we'll talk about Phoenix in more depth when that's opened as well, opinions-wise. But we'll also see some 2018 announcements towards the end of August from Six Flags and Cedar Point, and then we'll talk about more stuff there. So right now it's kind of a low point news-wise.
The calm before the storm.
Yeah. So not much going on, but that's the general gist.
Yeah. So we asked you what kind of topics you wanted us to talk about on the pod, and somebody called FinMake suggested talking about VR rides and screen rides, which we thought was quite a good idea. So we picked that, and we're going to just talk about kind of like what they are, what Harry thinks about them, whether he thinks they're good or bad, and then obviously read out some of your opinions so we can get kind of a wider debate. Mm-hmm. But I haven't been on that many.
Well, no.
Especially screen rides.
As VR coasters go, or VR rides go, I feel like we've both done quite a few, more than the average, probably
for
the
VR,
average enthusiast.
Yeah. For screen rides, I didn't even really know what they were before this discussion.
That'll be interesting. So you explain to us, as a novice, what VR rides are and what screen rides are. Go on. Start with VR.
Okay, VR rides are where you go on a roller coaster.
Not necessarily a roller coaster.
You go on a ride.
There we go.
You go on a ride and you put on a headset.
Yep.
And what you see is kind of, it's meant to look like you're there. So when you move your head, you can see, it's as if you would move your head in real life. Instead of just like watching a flat screen, you can kind of like look around.
Yeah.
And it's meant to feel like you're there in the moment.
In a virtual environment.
Yeah.
So you can be wherever you want to be, or wherever.
Well, wherever the theme takes
wherever
you.
the designers of the ride want you to be. That's where you are. And as I said, you move your head to the left, and your view will move to the left. So, in a way, you can see a lot more in VR. There's a wider perspective that you can have. I mean, a lot of people when they go on VR rides just look forwards anyway, and they don't usually go left or right. But there is a lot more going on than just the straight forward view. I
tend to look around on the chain lift, but then when you're on the ride, it's kind of hard to like. This is why I don't know why it's, what if it's any good, because when I'm on the ride, I can't really look around anyway.
Yeah, it is kind of difficult in that sense to do. But screen rides, on the other hand, are...
I don't know. No, the only one that I know of is Ratatouille at Disneyland Paris, which I get as a screen ride because obviously the whole thing is screens.
Yeah, so a ride that's heavily reliant on screens to explain the story or to kind of...
create the environment.
Create the actual ride itself. And as I said, Ratatouille is a good example of this, where there's quite a lot of use of screens to kind of put you in the place where the ride wants you to be. Often you'll find that rides try and use screens and 3D props to create more of a
Yeah, they do that on Ratatouille.
And they did that on Ratatouille, where there were 3D props as well as the screens to kind of put you in that place. Doesn't always work to the best of the ability, and people generally can find screen rides to be quite dull, and they can't, and not everyone appreciates them compared to, you know, rides that just have proper dedicated 3D theming. But then screen rides can be a lot more flexible than just 3D theming can. You can tell a lot more of a story with screens, and you know, you can actually animate characters to move and do all that kind of jazz, which you can't really do. You can do it with animatronics, but it's very, very difficult to do the same thing with animatronics.
So what's another example? Because I don't even know any other ones.
So you find a lot of screen rides at Universal.
Okay.
Like Transformers. It's quite a screen ride.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I think it's Skull Island.
So they're also dark rides?
Yeah, basically, they're basically dark rides that use screens instead of dedicated theming.
Yeah.
So the screens will that tell you part of the story instead of you just going through theming elements.
Yeah.
Starting with screen rides, we've both experienced Ratatouille, which you said it was at Disneyland Paris, but I've also just recently experienced Ghostbusters 5D at Heidi Park, so this dark ride with guns, with like lasers that you use to fire at ghosts and rack up the most points. So what do you think about Ratatouille then?
I think it's really cool because, well, mainly because of the, I don't know what you call it, but you know how the car's not on a track?
It's a trackless dark ride system, yeah.
That I think, obviously, that's nothing to do with the screens, but that's part of what makes it good, because you've got the screens and then also there's no track, so it feels more like you're not on a ride, if you get me. So I think the use of the trackless system and also the screens makes it more of a, you know, if it was on tracks, the screens wouldn't be as impressive, because I think it still feels like you're on a ride, whereas when the mouse like moves randomly and it kind of like loops in and out of all the 3D bits as well.
And the other mice.
Yeah, so it just makes it like such a cool, compared to other rides, it's like so different. And the screens were like so good. All the animation, obviously, because it's Disney, they've got it spot on.
So you had to wear 3D glasses as well.
Yeah, they didn't bother me though.
No, but it was a 3D kind of screen. But I think the good thing about Ratatouille, which I think you don't always find on other screen rides, was the use of 3D theming as well as the screens.
Yeah,
usually,
and the way they interact.
Yeah, usually it wasn't one or the other, but both at the same time.
Yeah.
And that way, it kind of helped to immerse you a bit more. So the screen would be where all the action was going on, but you'd also have scenery around you that puts you in the screen. And that was really what kind of made the experience there. And you don't always get that on other dark rides. Like, I just recently rode Ghostbusters 5D, and the amount of dedicated theming on that ride was minimal.
So was this a shooty ride?
It was a shooty ride where it was a kind of like a car that was on a track, and it would spin to face you between the screens.
I know what you mean.
Okay,
They do that on the Tomb Raider one.
Yeah,
Is it
Tomb
Tomb
Blaster.
Raider? Tomb Blaster.
Yeah, at Chessington.
Yeah.
So you're on this track, and you'd face the screen, and then you shoot all the ghosts, and then you'd move along and move towards the next screen. And they had some theming in between the screens, but it wasn't enough to kind of...
There were breaks in the...
It always pulled you out. It didn't feel very coherent. It was like boom, 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 boom. It wasn't a flow. It was like individual parts.
Yeah, and this is why I think Disney sometimes, obviously their rides aren't that great because they're more about the experience of the day. But this is why I think Disney actually can do rides well, is with the rides like Ratatouille, because they know how stories work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but they also have a lot of money.
Yeah, that helps.
It does, because Ratatouille was like...
I know.
Close to 300 million euros.
But...
And I imagine Ghostbusters 3D was close to 15 million euros.
But even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still tell a story well. And they do that with Ratatouille. The whole, like... every scene, it wasn't even every scene because there aren't really scenes. You continuously flow through this like thing, and you feel like you're in the film.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy.
I really, as you said, half put that down to the trackless ride system.
Yeah.
that really helped to kind of put you there.
Definitely.
And interacting with the other people in the other cars, because there was three little mouse cars that went around at the
We
same
haven't
time.
actually explained the general gist. Not no spoilers, but the cars are themed to, as if they're a mouse.
Yeah.
Well, a rat.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing of the ride is obviously you are Remy or one of the rats, and you're going around.
Yeah, you're not Remy, you're one of the rats.
Yeah. You're going around in his world, and there's kind of like it kind of follows the story of the film and what happened to him. So it's just crazy. Obviously, because you're the rat, all the theming is like as if you're tiny. So the 3D bits really help to like make you feel really small. Like they're so massive.
That's very true, and it's definitely not the case on Ghostbusters 5D, where you do feel like you're just going between each screen individually, and the time it takes for you to travel between the screens and turn around, you're kind of just waiting. There's not much to look at, and it's just kind of random bits of scenery. It really does pull you out, but the screens themselves aren't too great to begin with. I don't even know what the general story of that ride was. It was more just try and shoot as many
things.
ghosts as possible, which was weird. I did like the ride system, like the spinny system was a pretty cool thing. I hadn't really experienced anything like that. But yeah, the screens I wasn't a huge fan of. They were definitely relying too much on screens themselves rather than trying to create an immersive atmosphere that has everything. As we said though, we aren't really experts on screen rides, so I'll be interested to hear what questions people have asked about them and even their own opinions on screen rides. What we are kind of experts on now after riding so many are VR coasters and VR rides. You don't really find many VR rides actually. You find quite a few VR coasters nowadays, but VR rides is a whole different subgenre. So what VR rides and coasters have we done?
We've done.
What have you done?
I've done Galactica
Yep.
many times. Well, I've probably done it 5 times with the VR headset on. Because I didn't ride Air when it was Air. So I wanted to do it quite a few times without as well. We've also done Darren Brown's Ghost Train a lot of times.
Which isn't a roller coaster, but a
It's
dark
a
ride.
ride. And what was that one in Gardaland we did? Shaman.
Yeah.
That was a coaster.
Yeah.
Done that how many times? 2 times?
I only ran it once. It was VR.
Did we?
Yeah.
Did
'Cause
we
the
ride
queue-
without?
No.
Oh, so we did that one time.
Yeah.
Which probably isn't a fair judgment, but
No,
first
but-
impressions.
But the dispatches were like 7 minutes, and the queues were very long, so we didn't
Yes.
really want to wait for that.
It kept shutting down, didn't it? So we were lucky to
Yeah.
get there while it was open.
On top of that, I've done Alpine Express at Europa Park, the VR version. I never actually rode without VR. I only rode with VR, and that was quite an interesting ride. But
What ride is it?
it's a mine train.
Okay.
So yeah, Mine Train is Alpine Express at Europa Park. Shaman is a Vekoma sit-down coaster at Gardaland, and Galactica is a B&M flying coaster at Alton Towers. So yeah, we're quite good. We're experts on Galactica nowadays because we've been on it so many times. So what are your thoughts about Galactica as a ride and then as a ride with VR?
As a ride, as Air, technically, I think it's great. It's different, and it's something that I like, because I like less intense roller coasters. I do like intense ones, but I appreciate ones where you can actually just relax, and just it feels like you're flying, which is the aim of what they were trying to do. So I think it's really good as a coaster. With the VR, I see what they were trying to do, and it does make sense. I think the theme of it does fit really well with actually, like, because obviously they tried to make it as if you were flying, and the whole VR is you're flying through space. So it fits really well, but I'm just not sure. I'm not sure about whether I would rather have it or not, and I don't think I would.
Yeah, I agree with the theme. I think as a VR coaster and the actual VR content, Galactica does that quite well. It's a bit more reasonable than a lot of the other VR coasters, where the Six Flags ones are all about superheroes and things being attacked, whereas Galactica you can kind of get behind it with the whole portal thing going on, and the whole concept of the ride. I think it's a bit more together, and a bit more integrated.
And I do like the theming that they've put in, just in the stations and stuff. It looks really good. All the screens are really good. It makes you feel like you're actually going on the flight, you know? But I just don't know if it needs it. It could have just been the theme of space without VR anyway. And if you think about Shaman, that theme was a bit...
sketchy.
Yeah. I didn't really understand what the point was.
Yeah, Shaman was this... what kind of...
It was like an Indian, like a red Indian. This bear comes out of nowhere.
Red Indian hallucinogenic
it was
state
kind of like
thing.
a dream where you're running along and all these just different elements of theming just pop out.
Yeah.
Which didn't make as much sense as kind of you're flying in a spaceship. You know, it's hard. I think it's very hard to do VR on a coaster because you are technically flying. So if it's anything other than flying, it doesn't really make sense.
The one at Europa Park was all about, you were on this kind of minecart at the start anyway, and then all of the Europa Park characters were on the minecart with you, and then you were just travelling through these tracks. So
it was VR of what you were actually doing anyway.
Yeah, but you're in like like the Mario Kart mine shafts.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, where it's all really bumpy.
Really exaggerated. Yeah.
But then the second half, you're on a dragon, so it went a bit kind of skew.
How'd they get to that?
Yeah, it was pretty weird. As VR roller coasters go out of those three, I do feel like Galactica is the best, and Galactica's the best VR coaster I've experienced. As we said, it's the most put together, and it just fits a bit more, and it's also got the best VR content and actual VR quality.
Yeah, I will say we rode it yesterday with the VR, which I haven't done for ages, and the quality of it had actually improved a lot.
Yeah, it was sharp. You could still see the individual pixels of the screen.
Yeah, but it didn't matter as much.
No. Yeah, but Galactica has undergone improvements, and they got new headsets compared to the first ones. They used to be Samsung VR headsets, and then they got changed, and now they're, I think, dedicated headsets. So they're not phones anymore, but actual dedicated headsets, which is an improvement.
It made a massive difference, because I was quite shocked after we came off. I was like, wow, that was actually alright. It wasn't, it wasn't like, oh wow, everything should have VR on it. I was like, for VR, that was a lot better than it was.
And I actually believe that VR coasters can be a good idea. They do add something else to the ride, but most people get annoyed due to the fact that they kind of take away a lot from the ride as well.
Yeah.
The VR slows down dispatches, and people say that why have a coaster with good scenery when, people say that it's just lazy to have VR because then you don't have to build a load of scenery, you don't have to build a load of theming.
Yeah.
So they don't like that because it kind of ruins the...
Although you probably would, because when you're in the queue line, you'd be looking at the whole area anyway, so...
This is true.
You kind of need both.
Yeah, but people's main complaint is the fact that they want to ride a coaster. If they want to ride the coaster without VR, they still have to wait for the VR.
Yeah.
And
which I fully understand, because it drives me crazy.
But a ride which will solve this problem is Europa Park's Eurosat coaster, which is now the Can coaster. And what it'll have is 2 individual stations, one with VR and one without VR. So you can queue up for the individual stations, and it'll just dispatch trains. So if you don't want to ride VR, you have a normal length queue. If you want to ride a VR, then they don't have to fight against dispatching. You don't have to fight with other people who want or don't want VR. They're all a separate thing, and the actual layout can handle multiple trains anyway. So it shouldn't detract from the throughput too much anyway.
This is why I wanted to ask you, because at Galactica now they've got a queue system where you split up, each station you split up into 2 queues for VR and non-VR, but couldn't they do one station has VR and one doesn't, and then the one without can send out 2 cars while the other VR bit is faffing about? Would that work? I don't even know.
On Galactica, no. Because the way that Galactica actually has the trains go around the track, you notice how you dispatch from one station and return to the other.
Yeah.
And if Galactica wants to run the most trains possible, that always has to be the case.
Okay.
So then you can't have dedicated stations at that point.
This is what I was wondering. I was like, why didn't they just do that? But obviously I was like, oh, they probably can't.
Exactly,
I don't know
they
why.
can't. But on Can Coaster, because that thing will run 5, 6, 7 trains, I don't know how many exactly, they'll just pour all the trains that are VR into the VR section, and all the trains that aren't VR into the non-VR section.
Yeah.
Because they only had one station before anyway, and it would get them out pretty quick.
Yeah.
So it's basically only due to the way that Galactica's set up that it can't run 2 individual stations.
Which kind of supports the point that you shouldn't really put VR onto an existing coaster that hasn't been designed to work around VR, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think VR coasters that would be built from the ground up would be very good. And that's what Can Coaster basically is now, because they ripped out all the track and are redesigning it as a non-VR and VR experience together.
Yeah.
So it will be very interesting to see, because I think that's probably the first ground-up coaster that is VR dedicated to some degree.
Yeah.
And I imagine it will work much better than previous iterations.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, but we will see. So we've also done Darren Brown's Ghost Train, which is not a roller coaster, but a ride that has VR. And you don't really get many non-coaster rides with VR nowadays. So it's something very different. And Darren Brown's Ghost Train on its opening year was good, but it wasn't fantastic.
I think they had a lot of problems which just made it a bit temperamental, and then the temperamentalness of it made it less exciting, because it did keep breaking down, and we never knew when we were in the queue if it was actually going to work or not. But
Darren Brown's Ghost Train in 2017 was very fantastic and one of my most favourite dart rides so far. Because in general, it's such a unique ride, and it's something that no other park has done.
Yeah.
This is something that Thorpe Park as a park has done by themselves, and you'd expect it to be done by someone like Disney or Universal. This is a system.
It is on their level.
Yeah, this is a system that hasn't been done by any other company, but Thorpe Park managed to do it, and in 2017 it was working well.
They pulled it off.
They did pull it off. 2018 they've made some changes to the middle of the section with some changes to how the live bit flows, and it is a bit of a disappointment. It isn't as good as it used to be, but it doesn't take away from the ride too much. But overall, I don't see how people can say that Darren Brown's Ghost Train is a bad ride when, one, it's unlike anything else. Like, you wouldn't expect a park like Thorpe Park to do that and to create something that's so unique. And two, people say it doesn't scare them, but it doesn't
I
have
don't
to.
ride it because it scares me.
No, but it doesn't have to scare you. You don't need to be scared to enjoy it.
Exactly.
So that's just
It's just
stupid.
about riding something where you can actually just focus on the environment that they've created, instead of it being on a coaster where you can't really take it all in.
Yeah.
They've made it so that you can take in literally everything that's happening, and I think that's why it's so good, because even when you walk in, do you remember when we walked in the first time? I don't want to ruin it, but we walked in to the main bit, and we were just like, wow.
Yeah.
How did they do this?
As all the theming is very good. It isn't all about the VR, and that's the best bit about Darren Brown's Ghost Train.
I think that's why it works so well, because it's kind of like the screen ride argument. You need to have the VR, but not forget about all the other theming as well, which they didn't do.
No.
Yeah.
So Darren Brown's Ghost Train, I would like to see be done by someone like Universal or Disney.
Yeah.
Something on a larger scale, something that works a bit more consistently, because it really has a lot of potential. And I do not know how Thorpe Park managed to pull off a ride that hasn't been done by anyone. Like, I don't see how people can't credit it for that. It literally isn't like anything else.
But maybe that's why they don't like it, because they don't realise that it's like this new thing that they've created, and they're just comparing it to what we already have.
Yeah, but you can't. It's just something completely different. And
what's it even called? Like, what's the name of the... What is it?
It's Darren Brown's Ghost Train Rise of the Demon.
No, but what is the ride? What? It's not a...
The ride system?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Darren Brown's Ghost Train is built by so many different companies. Like, each part of the ride is built by a different company. There isn't a name for it.
Exactly.
It's a mishmash.
It's a new thing.
Yeah, it's a mishmash of loads of different ride
Technology.
systems. Yeah, exactly. Like there's the moving train part. That's already a ride system that's used by other rides.
Yeah.
Like ones that usually have screens around the outside and you move through the screens and
Okay.
stuff goes on. That's the ride system. But then the VR is Vive, and the VR system has dedicated computers. So each headset has a proper computer, like a proper desktop with a beefy graphics card running it. And that means that you can have VR that is actually good quality, and ones where you can barely see the pixels at that point. It's actually a decent enough quality to kind of immerse you in the atmosphere. And something like that ride, 5 years' time, could be something extraordinary.
Yeah.
Where the VR is really good and really immersive. If some other company or some other park does that with better VR tech, then it will be a fantastic ride.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see more rides like Darren Brown's Ghost Train, because I think the potential is definitely there.
It's a new thing on its own.
So many different parts to it that it is more of an experience that is several rides in itself.
Yeah.
And the fact,
And it's so long.
yeah, and the fact that it has multiple aspects to it that can change. Like the VR sections are different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They have so much potential for, like, if in the future they can just change it all around and it'd be a brand new ride.
I do hope at some point Thorpe Park do change the things, and the thing is, it has a lot of potential. So 5 years' time, if they ripped out all the VR tech and put in new ones,
Yeah.
and kind of rebrand it slightly, I think it could do really well. It's just a real shame that no one really cares.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate shame, is no one actually cares about it.
It deserves more credit than it's got.
It really does. I think it's one of the best art rides in the UK.
Yeah.
So Darren Brown's Ghost Train is if you haven't ridden it, I think you definitely should. And I'd like to see what people think about Darren Brown's Ghost Train and why they don't appreciate it. I'd love to see more comments about that. So please, do tell us why, if you have been on Darren Brown's Ghost Train and you don't really care for it, why?
And those of you who aren't scared by it, how are you not scared by it? It's literally...
I'm not scared by it.
It's so... But it's good, right?
Yeah.
It's like a good level of, like, horror.
Yeah, it doesn't need to scare you
And-
to be fun, though.
But it does scare me.
Yeah, I imagine
It scares a
lot
lot of people.
Yeah.
So, but it's like it fit. That's a good thing that it's at Thorpe, because Thorpe's all about the,
Thrill.
the thrill, and it will work well for their Halloween stuff and all of that. It'll fit well with the type of people that go to Thorpe will really like it, I think, especially on Halloween.
But yeah, overall, I'm not too distasteful to VR. I think it's a good concept, and I think it kind of adds an extra level to the ride. In Galactica's case, they put VR on that ride because the queue times for it and its popularity was dwindling, and as soon as they whacked VR on it, now it's always one of the busiest rides in the park. So it has helped in that kind of sense. Other rides, I think, get the same treatment. A lot of parks will use VR to kind of boost the popularity of a certain ride.
I think that works well, because for people who don't have a VR headset at home, it's really exciting to just try VR anyway.
And not many people do have a VR headset.
Yeah,
So,
so
it is very exciting.
It's something you can experience even if you're not just riding it to be on the coaster, you're just riding it to see what the VR's like.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of... I'm very glad that Alton Towers did, or at least one UK park did get a VR coaster, because then at least we got to try it.
Yeah.
At least everyone in the UK got to try it. Because without a VR coaster, people would be... I think it'd be quite upsetting to have all of these other parks, like all the other Six Flags parks, have VR coasters, and then everyone in the UK not be able to ride one.
Yeah.
So
I think Alton Towers are really good at making sure they have a variety of things going on. So like how they've got Wicker Man now, which is a wooden coaster, which in the UK people didn't really... There wasn't a new one that everybody loved, because everybody loves it now, that everybody loves. And then they've got the VR, like they're getting with all the trends, if you get
They are
me.
a very well-rounded park, and if you think, I don't really know what kind of coasters Alton Towers would really need.
Exactly.
They needed a wooden coaster, and they got a fantastic one.
Yeah.
So now that park is pretty well-rounded, and yeah, you are right. It has a bit of everything, and that's what you want from a park. You don't want similar experiences. You want different experiences, And that's what I think VR offers. It offers an extra experience than what the ride can offer.
Yeah.
And I do like it in that sense. I think I can appreciate riding with VR every so often. Like our last ride, I did appreciate riding with VR.
It was quite exciting to do it in a different way.
It was.
For people who ride the rides a lot, it was good for us to like get on and do it differently.
Yeah. And this is why I think VR gets a bit too much hate, purely because of the dispatch times.
Yeah.
But parks have shown, good parks have shown that you can have a VR coaster and dispatch well.
Well, like you said, when we were queuing yesterday, the dispatch time of the VR was less than most of the American dispatches anyway.
So I timed it on Taylor's, Coaster Studios' dispatch time thing. He makes videos where he records the dispatch time of different parks in the US and different parks in the world, and then states whether it's good or bad and how long it took. I timed Galactica to be somewhere around 2 minutes, which is better than operations at some Six Flags parks on non-VR rides.
So...
And Galactica's a half dedicated VR coaster, so that is pretty goddamn good, really. So we don't really have much to moan about. It's the parks in the US and rides like Shaman that took 7, 8, 9 minutes to dispatch with VR. That's the issue.
Yeah. The queue wasn't even that bad yesterday for Galactica. But I remember the Shaman queue and thinking, how is it taking this long to do this?
Yeah.
So,
Talking of Shaman, what I was disappointed by was just the kind of lack of quality of the VR. It was choppy. It wasn't a very good storyline, and it just didn't really work that well.
It was just a bit random.
Yeah.
It didn't really tie together. It was kind of... I don't even know if you were meant to be running or not. It didn't really fit with the... whatever element the roller coaster was doing, it didn't really follow that, whereas Galactica does. And then the random bear that just comes out, it was just... I don't know.
Yeah, Shaman was a lot more of... You could kind of tell what you were doing. Like, if you see what I mean, Galactica, you go on it, it's all one integrated experience. You can't really tell that you're on a... Well, it's difficult to explain. On Shaman, I knew what the elements were. I could tell what we were doing.
It was broken up more.
It was broken up more, and I was like, this is a loop.
Well, this is the thing that you said about the screen rides, where Ghostbusters was more like, it had a lot of breaks, whereas Ratatouille was more flowy.
Yeah. Which
I think is the same with Galactica and Shaman. Like, Galactica was more... It made more sense as a whole ride, whereas Shaman was okay, but it was just kind of like, oh, let's throw a bear in. Oh, let's do this. It didn't really have a point to the whole storyline.
Yeah, and that really sums up the world of VR in total, is it can be done well, but most parks do it badly. And I think that's why most people hate VR, because they haven't had the opportunity to ride a VR coaster that is actually good and is actually well integrated.
I think it's just quite a hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing to get right.
It's a hard thing for you to... Because roller coasters do move in a certain way, that there's only a certain amount of themes that would work with the movements that you're doing. So unless they're all going to be themed to some kind of flying theme... Well,
the Six Flags they're all about you in like this aircraft that's going around and shooting at things and getting shot down.
So unless they're all going to be about that, I don't think they're going to work as well. What about screen rides? Do you think they are done well or not?
Well, it's a hard one to kind of gauge when you've only done two that are kind of polar opposites, one that works well and one that doesn't. I think if you're a park like Universal or Disney, who has a big budget, then you probably can get away with doing screen rides as long as you put enough theming and you put enough 3D props in there. If you don't and you dedicate too much of the ride to just screens, then that's when the problem starts. You don't want a ride to have too many screens. You want to find the perfect balance between screens and proper props so that the ride is one coherent experience rather than just you bouncing between all of the individual screens.
I think for screen rides, you need to not just have a ride that's like a screen. The screen shouldn't just be used as the main attraction. It should be something that complements everything else that you would normally do in a dark ride.
Something to enhance the actual experience.
Yeah.
And enhance what you couldn't do with normal props.
Yeah, but not forget everything else, because without everything else, it kind of isn't as good, because it's just like being in the cinema.
Yeah.
It just makes you feel like you are just watching something on the TV instead of being in there.
That was the problem with Ghostbusters 5D, is that you did just feel like you were watching screens the entire ride.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the point of what they're aiming for.
No, definitely not.
We've asked some of you guys if you had any questions for Harry about VR or screen rides, and we had quite a few responses. Somebody said, what coaster type is most suited for VR in your opinion?
That's an interesting question. Realistically, you want a ride type that isn't too intense and is pretty smooth. Something like, I feel like a wing coaster could do pretty well, or a flying coaster.
Yeah.
Something that just isn't too... You want a smooth ride experience, ultimately. You want, as you said previously, most VR concepts will have something to do with flying, or something to do with kind of smooth and gradual turns. So you want something that mimics that. So something like a B&M flying coaster or a B&M wing coaster, I think would fit very, very well. But we haven't seen a VR wing coaster yet. But Galactica as a ride, I think does suit VR quite well.
Yeah, me too. And I think you need a ride where it's, people often saw Air as kind of a boring ride because it's so smooth and chill. But I think you need a ride where it is quite chill, because then you're not taking away from the actual, the actual ride itself.
But not only that, you need to be able to kind of experience the VR, and you need to be able to take time to experience the VR.
Yeah, you don't want something too intense.
Yeah, on a fast ride that's element after element after element, you won't have the time to do it. But on something that's a bit more smooth and a bit more floaty, something like the Swarm, where you can really take the time to look at things, then I think it'd be a much better ride.
Yeah. Do you think VR would suit the Runaway Mine Train at Alton Towers?
Honestly, and I've talked to people about this before. I think as a mine train goes, Alton Towers Mine Train is one of the best.
Yeah.
Because...
And also, the bit where it goes in with the rapids.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd want to just put a headset on and forget about that.
It's a really good mine train as it is. So
yeah.
I think it's a bit too janky to suit a proper headset. As we're talking about, you need a ride that's smooth and floaty. Mine trains are not smooth and floaty at all, and especially that one. And powered coasters in general, because of the fact that they are powered, they don't accelerate smoothly. You go from slow to fast, and that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
You need a ride that's gradual and there's no sharp accelerations or sharp turns, and all of those things are what a mine train coaster are. So no, I do not think it would be suited for VR.
Also, it would ruin the choo-choo moment, which is
the
highlight of the ride.
Yeah.
Somebody replied to that and said, "Can we have VR on Octonauts, please?" Which is actually quite interesting, because how would you integrate VR onto a kid coaster?
It's too short.
No, but just kids, would they...
No,
would they
a lot of
even...
VR headsets you have to be a certain age.
Yeah.
Because they don't know whether it can damage people's eyes when they're developing. So it doesn't really work.
And also, I don't think kids would get it as much as adults do.
But the ride system, I think it could work. A gradual, smooth ride like that, I think you could get away with it.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of scenery going on.
No. It would work.
And it would be cool to have it as a kids' show.
Yeah.
Themed to a kids' show.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
I would ride that.
Yeah.
If you could describe VR at theme parks in one word, what would the word be? And what VR ride would you associate that word with?
Bodged. That's a good word. For people who don't know what that means, kind of like...
Just thrown together.
Thrown together. It works, but it doesn't work elegantly.
Yeah.
Which I think sums up very well. And any ride that kind of fits along with that is any Six Flags VR ride. Any one that you want, they're all bad.
And Shaman.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But Shaman looks to be better than the Six Flags VR ride. So,
really?
Yeah.
What's the best application of VR or screen rides that you've seen? So the one that you think's the best application of either one.
Well, we already really talked about this. Galactica's the best VR ride VR coaster that I've been on, whereas Ratatouille is the best screen ride I've been on, but there aren't many.
Which one would you say is better out of the two of them?
Well, Ratatouille, but you can't really compare the two.
Yeah.
Because they're very different rides.
I think though...
And Ratatouille was built as that, whereas Galactica wasn't built as that.
Yeah, I think that's why Ratatouille is slightly better, because the whole time that they were planning that ride, the whole point of it was to have screens, you know?
Yeah.
Can you still see VR being part of rides in theme parks in 10 to 15 years' time?
Well, in 10 to 15 years' time, the actual VR technology will be better. It's too early for VR coasters, really.
Yeah.
The VR tech just isn't good enough yet, and you need proper dedicated computers to have good VR, ones where you can't see the individual pixels, and you cannot put proper like desktop PCs on moving roller coasters. It just
all
doesn't
in good
work.
time.
So yeah, all in good time. In 10 to 15 years' time,
they'll all have VR.
Hopefully not, but VR as a concept and VR as a technology will be much more progressed. It'll be much better, and that way it'll be much better to integrate onto roller coasters. So I can see it continuing to be a trend, and I can see it over time improving drastically.
Becoming more popular as well, I think. As soon as technology gets smaller, you know, the physical bits of technology that we make get smaller, it just starts to become, you know, it's just everywhere. It's like phones.
Yeah, but it's not the tech being smaller, it's just the power. The phones or those small units don't have enough processing power to
be good.
display the kind of quality you need.
Yeah.
You need to be able to have like a proper 4K display on the headset so that you can't see the individual pixels, but you just can't push that.
Do you think in the future they'll do more, not an actual roller coaster, but you know those the box thingies that you sit in, and then the box tilts, and you watch the screen? Is that what it's called? Do you think they'll do that rather than because I can't remember what I watched, but it was some kind of program or something, and a guy stood in the middle of this circular room, and he had like a headset kind of thing on, and the whole room turned into like a world around him, and he could walk about and stuff. Do you reckon it'd be more of that rather than just throw it on a coaster as it is?
Any ride's all about capacity, so you need to be able to get a lot of people on and off. Otherwise it doesn't work. So
but what I mean is you could have a room where you put like 50 people in it with a headset on, and it's just a world, and then maybe the whole room like moves or something.
It's been done.
Has it?
Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, there's things called flying theatres, which are like platforms people sit down in and they can move, and they usually have like a curved display in front of them.
Yeah.
So everyone watches the display, and you're meant to be like flying through a world, and it will tilt and all that. So they took that and made it VR.
Wow.
So now everyone's on a platform. It tilts forwards, backwards, left and right as you go through this world, and that seems to be quite a good application of VR. I don't know how good the quality actually is VR wise, but I can see something like that becoming more of a thing moving forward, especially as the tech gets better. And
that would add kind of another like standard theme park. You know, you have your flat rides, you have your coasters, and then you have your, what is it called, flying theatre.
Yeah,
that might become more of a standard thing that you find.
I think VR is a good idea to put on a flying theatre, just because it makes it much more immersive. Then you can look around the whole,
that's what I mean,
360 degrees. You don't have to just look forwards.
Yeah, and it's easier to look around than if you're on a coaster.
Very true.
Which is hard. What are your thoughts on the best ways to operate VR alongside the normal rides? So should the VR and non-VR people sit in the same train, or should they have a separate VR train? Basically, how does VR affect ride operations?
Well, usually VR drastically slows down ride operations, and the best thing that you want is what Can Coaster's doing, where you have 2 stations and you have a ride system that can handle a large amount of trains. Then you just dispatch normal trains, non-VR trains, until the VR train is ready. Then you dispatch the VR train and then carry on with the non-VR ones. So that means the non-VR train capacity is slightly reduced, but not by too much, compared to whether it would be just a half VR coaster where the capacity would be like halved or more. It would only be like 80% or 75%. that kind of system, 2 dedicated stations, I imagine would be the best one.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of effort to do on the parks kind of side. And usually now, if a coaster was built from the ground up with VR, you could do it. But I can't see a lot of parks making changes to their rides to make that possible.
Yeah. Have you ever actually enjoyed VR on a ride, or is it 100% rubbish?
Yeah, I've enjoyed most of the VR experience I've had, really. Galactica, especially our last ride, was enjoyable. Darren Brown's Ghost Train is a fantastic ride, and that's very enjoyable for a VR ride. Shaman was okay. It wasn't that great. I wouldn't say it was enjoyable, but it wasn't bad. And then Alpine Express, I did enjoy that. It was fun, a fun little ride. I don't really get why people hate on VR so much. I think the main reason is just capacity, and then everyone forgets about the benefits of VR and actually forget to enjoy the experience because they're too angry about how long it took to get there. But yeah, no, VR, it does work, and it is an enjoyable experience when it's done right. And that's the main point. You've got to do it right.
I think it's enjoyable in moderation.
Yes.
It would not be enjoyable if every single ride you had to have VR on it.
Very
true.
But
when you do it occasionally, it's enjoyable because it's something new.
Something different, something new.
This episode's poll was, do you think VR is best used on coasters or experiences? Example, DGBT. And then you guys let us know why you picked each one. And we're going to have... So Harry hasn't been looking at a lot of the Twitter stuff for this episode.
Which will be the same for future episodes as well.
Yeah, we're going to try and keep it so that I know what's going on and he doesn't, so that his opinion's kind of more fresh. And so we're going to try and get him to guess the results of the poll. So the 2 options were coasters or experiences.
Experiences.
And what do you reckon the percent was?
80.
83. So 83% for experiences and 17% for coasters.
But we've touched on this where VR is more fitting in an experience kind of format because then you can actually take in what's happening.
Yeah.
Roller coasters are often too fast and too dramatic to be able to take in what is truly happening in the VR. Whereas you can build an experience around the fact that people need to take time to take it all in.
Yeah. So the person who suggested that question, so just to let you know, we're going to take one of the questions from the questions that you want to ask Harry, and we're going to use that as the poll because we think that would be quite an interesting way to do it. The person whose question that was, Digital Dan, said, I prefer on experiences, and they said that on coasters it seems to shake and be out of time and have problems and slow down dispatches, which is all the main issues that we've kind of talked about.
I haven't seen many coasters where it is out of sync though.
Mm.
The ones that I've experienced at least have seemingly been quite good when it comes to replicating the movement and being on time.
They also said the HTCs are better than the Gear VR.
Yes, so
which
Darren
means
Brown's
nothing
Ghost Train.
to me.
Darren Brown's Ghost Train has HTC Vive, which the Vive requires a dedicated computer.
Okay.
Whereas most of the other VR coasters are Gear headsets, which is just a phone.
Yeah.
So a dedicated computer with a massive graphics card compared to a phone, there's a big difference.
Exactly.
But you can't strap a desktop PC onto a coaster, which you've already said.
Some other people were kind of discussing as well, VR just shouldn't be on coasters. It's something different, I'll give them that, but not in a good way. It becomes too sickly, especially the ones I've done on a Gerstlauer spinning coaster. Wow.
Yeah, that doesn't seem good.
Whereas if you use it on something like DGBT, that works really well.
It does.
Yeah.
But
a spinning coaster.
people say that feel sick on them, but I haven't experienced it ever. Have you experienced?
I haven't, but I'm not one to get
motion
sick.
Yeah.
A lot of people get sick on things like the Smiler, whereas I don't get any of that. So I think it is kind of like weird, just don't get sick. I can see how it can cause you to feel sick because it is so weird to like move and then have a different, you're not actually looking at where you're moving. It's a screen, so I can see how that would make a lot of people feel sick, which is I think one of the reasons a lot of people don't want to ride with it.
I guess so, yeah.
Someone replied to that saying, there was one time on Galactica where the orientation wasn't right on the VR.
Oh, right,
I had to take the headset off just after we set off, otherwise it probably would have made me feel unwell.
When they set up the VR on Galactica for you, they do tell you to look forwards, or they do try and make sure that you're looking forwards, because then they reset it. So they set the orientation, they tell you to go look forwards, and then they set the orientation to that level.
Yeah.
And you must have just accidentally looked up or down or left or right at that point in time.
Or maybe it just glitched out or something.
Yeah. So that's really quite unfortunate, because usually it is quite good in that kind of sense.
Someone else said, for me it comes down to a capacity and seamlessness issue. Experienced rides are designed with VR in mind. They won't have such an awful capacity, and the putting and taking off is more coherent with the story rather than shoehorned in.
That's very true. Especially a good example of that is Darren Brown's Ghost Train, where they make the headsets part of the storyline.
Yeah.
You need to be able to survive by wearing the headsets, kind of thing, and that way it does work.
And also the people working on the ride are like shouting at you, like, put the headset on, and it kind of makes it more intense as an experience that you have to quickly put the headset on, you know.
Or
makes you a bit stressed out.
Or you could frame it in the sense that you have to be able to wear the headset to see this world.
Yeah.
Like a hidden world that you have to put the headset on to be able to see. That anything where it frames it in the fact that you need the headset to be able to kind of follow the gist is a good sense, whereas VR coasters, you just kind of put it on, as they said.
Which kind of ruins the whole thing, because you know that you're just putting a headset on and you're just, you know.
Yeah, that's very true.
It doesn't seem as real when it's done that way.
No, it doesn't.
Somebody else said, coasters are more about experiencing what you're physically seeing, and it's not that comfortable to have a clunky headset strapped to your head. I really like VR when it's implemented effectively, though. That's a good point about how coasters are more about what you're physically seeing and, you know, the way you're moving and stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
Someone replied to that saying, if things were built from the ground up for it in a relatively simplistic way so that it doesn't break down, that would be the best way to use VR.
Which is Can Coaster.
Yeah, so I think we'll see a lot of them more in the future, whereas now I think they were probably just trying to test it out before dedicating a whole ride to it, you know? You don't want to just build a whole ride based around VR and then figure out that it doesn't really work.
Very true. And it'll be interesting to see what people think of Can Coaster when it does open with the VR and non-VR sections. I think that might make or break future non- and VR attractions, you know, future attractions that are built for VR from the ground up.
Yeah. Somebody replied and said, there's still going to be a faff factor on coasters as the headsets have to be adjusted so they won't fall off during the course of the ride.
That's very true, which is why when we said what roller coasters are the best types is ones that aren't too forceful and ones that are smooth.
Yeah.
You need that on a ride, otherwise, you know.
That's actually true. If it was such a really rough coaster, the headset might just fall off.
Exactly. Yeah, so, it's definitely a true concern.
Yeah.
That marks the end of episode 2 of this podcast. Hopefully it was better than the first one. I imagine it was.
Hopefully.
The topic of discussion was actually quite an interesting one. And moving forwards, I would like to talk about not just theme parks and not just individual rides, but kind of systems like we just did with this. It's a bit more of an interesting topic when there's multiple rides that you can kind of talk about and there's multiple factors, whereas one theme park is just one theme park. Not everyone can relate to one theme park, whereas more people can relate to a VR experience because they're everywhere.
Yeah. And also, it's nice to talk about things that we don't really talk about normally.
Yes.
And a lot of the stuff, obviously we did Alton Towers because it was our first one and we wanted to do...
It was a good one to get into it.
Yeah. But a lot of the things that have been suggested are kind of things that we always talk about, whereas it's really cool to talk about things that I don't really know about.
Yeah.
And, you know, things that are quite specific rather than general.
So when
topics.
you're making suggestions, do bear that in mind and just kind of think
outside the box.
Think outside the box and think about what would be interesting to hear about. Maybe something that you don't know a lot about yourself as well.
Yeah. Because guaranteed I won't know about it if you don't know about it.
That's very true. When you are sending your questions in, you can do so by...
So we've got an email address, which is coasterwalkrambles@gmail.com. It's all on our Twitter. All of our information is on there. So that's at CBR Podcast.
So yeah, if you want to follow the main gist of things, at CBR Podcast, make sure to subscribe to the CBR Podcast YouTube channel.
On YouTube, yeah.
Yes, and that's where all the podcasts will be from now on as well. So if you're ever on your desktop and just want to listen to the podcasts, then that's the channel to do so.
We're also on SoundCloud for the minute,
Yes.
which is where all the pods will be on there. You can get the details off our Twitter. But if you just search for podcast, just search for podcast.
We'll be there, yeah.
We are number one hit for
Yeah.
podcast. No, just search for Coast Spot Rambles. It should come up. And hopefully we'll be on iTunes soon.
Yes.
Bear with.
We'll let you know when that happens.
Yeah, just try to keep searching. It might just pop up one day, who knows? But it should be within the next week that we come on.
And moving forward, we will have a dedicated website for the podcast where you'll be able to listen to all the individual episodes as well as, have more information about each one as well.
Yeah.
Also, follow me on Twitter @CoasterBot and on every other platform, Facebook, Instagram,
Literally every
YouTube,
platform.
whatever you want, follow there. All CoasterBot, managed to nab that name pretty well. But that marks the end of this podcast. Again, make sure to send us in some suggestions and make sure to be active when we ask for a poll or we ask for certain questions on topics, because we do love to hear about your opinions and we do want your questions for the podcast itself.
Yeah. And who knows, your question might be picked for the massive poll, so, get them in there, get your opinions out, let us know what you think, let us know what we can improve on as well, because we're always open to that, and we want to make this better and more suited to you, so just let us know.
Bye.
Bye-bye.